Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Terence Mauri. I will tell you all about Terence in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership position and you work with leaders, as you will definitely discover that Terence does, you do it with a purpose of common cause, bringing people together to work in a kind of community. Welcome, Terence Mauri.
Thank you, John. It's great to be on the show.
Great. I want to tell all folks all about you. Terence Mauri is a global expert on the future of leadership, AI, and disruption. He's joining us today from London, but he also has an office in New York. He's the founder of a Future Trends think tank, Hack Future Lab, and is a very acclaimed author. So you spearheaded a movement for leaders to find the upside of disruption and rethink leadership for a post-AI world. I'm not sure we really need that, do we, Terence? Anyway, actually, and it's a wonderful lead-in because the name of your book we're going to talk about is The Upside of Disruption. Welcome, Terence Mauri.
Thank you, John. And again, really happy to share some of the takeaways from my book today, The Upside of Disruption.
Well, I'm very excited about talking to you today because you dabble in a field that I'm experimenting. Not you don't dabble, you explore. I'm dabbling in the concept of AI. But so often when we hear AI, it sends up warning signals. So what scares us about AI, Terence?
Look, it's an important question. And I think in terms of framing, we've always had a fear. Automation anxiety, for example, goes back 2,000 years to the Greek islands of Talos and the automations going back to Greek mythology. In the 1950s, Marvin Minsky at MIT and a bunch of professors really spoke about this idea of artificial intelligence. In fact, at one point, they were going to call it applied statistics. But that doesn't sound so cool, does it? Artificial intelligence was inspired by science fiction writers such as Neil Stephenson and Arthur C. Clarke and many others. And I think one of the big fears is this idea, for example, this idea that it's going to take all our jobs. And I think that's a genuine fear as well. We have to be careful of what Esther Perel, the psychotherapist, calls artificial intimacy or artificial idiocy or artificial interactions. And as the name suggests, it's artificial intelligence. So, today I want to have a discussion with you about how can we harness AI as a tailwind for reimagination and for human maximization, not just profit maximization.
I like the way you use the term AI and frame it as tailwind, as a pushing rather than a headwind. So, what leads you to that kind of concept, Terence?
So there's big questions here. Will AI be a disruptor or a democratizer? Will AI be an enabler or some type of dystopian golem mining us of our humanity? And so I think questions are the answer when it comes to AI. How do we harness AI in an ethical and responsible and sustainable way? For example, my research at Hack Future Lab shows that data centers today on the planet consume over 5% of global electricity. Projections to 2030 could be 25%. And that's just not tenable. That's just one example of a potential risk that we have to mitigate now.
Now, I want to pat you on the back for your bravery, because when I don't know, maybe 30 years ago when I was doing what I'm doing now as a coach and things like that, the concept of disruption seemed to be all the rage. We embraced the concept of creative destruction, all those kinds of things. Since the 21st century, we've had a little bit too much disruption. So what's the upside, Terence? Which is the title of your book, The Upside of Disruption.
Well, it's true. We're drowning in disruption. We have career disruption, climate disruption, big disruption, personal disruption. And to the point where, John, I recently went to a meeting and we exchanged business cards. And on the business card, it said, Director of Disruption. And the person confessed to me his job title was as popular as a funeral director.
Yeah.
The purpose of my new book, The Upside of Disruption, is to reframe the conversation. I think we need a national conversation around this idea of the upside of disruption. And my main argument is that when we're drowning in data, when we're drowning in meta anxiety, meetings, emails, bureaucracy, it's easy to miss the upside of disruption. The upside could be a better way of doing things, a healthier way, a more sustainable way, a chance to reimagine, a chance to rethink. And so when we crave the certainty, when we crave the comfort of certainty, we often miss that upside. And so that's what it means. How do we find the upside? And not taking a risk is sometimes a risk.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I'm thinking about the great management thinker and writer, Rosabeth Moss Kanter, who spent her career at Harvard writing about and teaching the concept of change. And if I remember her correctly, she once said, "I hate change," and which is, I mean, change is good for everybody except me. So you can change, Terence, but please leave me alone. So is that kind of what disruption is all about too? Do you see it framed that way? So.
Exactly. Words give energy, words give power. And what is change? It's source code for learning. It's source code for curiosity over conformity. A culture of curiosity, for example, embraces ideas that challenge the status quo. A culture of conformity rejects ideas that challenge the status quo. So even for everything to change, really it's that source code for learning, for growth, for curiosity over conformity.
Well, and you frame it interesting. You have a phrase called the curse of sameness. So when you frame it that way, it's like, well, I'm not the same as you, or my company is different from your company. So what is the curse of sameness? So
every organization suffers from collective FOMO, fear of missing out, or even FOBO, fear of becoming obsolete. And so what this means is that going to the same business schools, thinking the same way, the same paradigms, the same mindsets. For example, even with AI, what I'm seeing is, the pandemic accelerated digital transformation, but actually it's also accelerated cost cutting. And one of the worst things that we can do with AI is just use it to displace humanity. So the curse of sameness is this idea that we're all doing the same thing. We're all thinking the same way. And my main argument here is that the future is not just about technology or trends. It's about mindsets and choices as well. And that means challenging orthodoxy. It means challenging the always done ways. We have 21st century now, but we're still applying 20th century and 19th century mindsets, industrial mindsets, to the exponential age. So as Einstein wrote many years ago, you can't explore a new world with an old map.
Well, I think germane to that concept is a phrase that I just started laughing when I read it, and it's called zombie leadership. Would you tell me what that is and where does it come from?
Zombie leadership is it's universal, it's perennial. What it means in a very practical way, so our folks listening today can relate to it, is it's overmanaged and underled. It's checking rather than coaching. It's transactional moments rather than transformational moments. It's wait and see rather than challenge and grow. I once had a boss who was called the Shadow. He would come into the room. He would come up behind me. He would whisper in my ear, "What are you doing, Terence?" It was terrifying. I'd feel this cold shiver go down my spine. He thought he was coaching. And we can all relate to this, overmanaged and underled. So this is what zombie leadership means. It means leadership that does the opposite. It doesn't create nutritional value. It doesn't elevate belonging or believing or becoming. And it's like anti-leadership. It creates a quit and stay mentality, and it damages engagement. We've seen the latest Gallup study, nearly $9 billion a year now worldwide, lost every year because of a lack of engagement, a lack of meaning, a lack of inclusivity.
Great. Now, you in Disrupt the Upside, let's talk positive now. You came up with a wonderful framework about there are disruptions, it's part of our life. And how do we determine which are going to be sustainable, and which I'm assuming is a key purpose of your business? So what are these factors, 4 factors, and Can you explain what they are, please? So,
One of the framings I start with is, what are your billion-dollar beliefs? And a billion-dollar belief is this clear-eyed conviction in some of the big mega trends that are secular and here to stay. So secular, structural, and here to stay trends. Because when you have billion-dollar beliefs, you can prioritize a strategy, you can prioritize your leadership, your resource allocation around that. So for example, one would be optimize reality. This idea that we're transitioning from doing digital to being digital. Another would be whole system planning, this pivot to regenerative business models around click values, clean, lean, inclusive, and circular. And in terms of a sort of criteria that what a leader can use, well, it could be, for example, adoption rate. It could be, for example, market and regulatory shift. It could be economic impact, and it could be long-term sustainability. These would be good examples of criteria that we could use to assess the disruptor and turn it into that tailwind for long-term vitality.
Right. Well, we've all been, and certainly in the 21st century, been living with disruptive technologies in a positive sense. Some may disagree because I have friends who still have flip phones, but the smartphone, it's totally changed everything. And, it's our, key form of staying connected with the world. So that would be an example of a billion-dollar belief that just becomes sustainable.
Exactly. Yes, we right now, this is a key inflection point in humanity where we've always been doing this, by the way, but I think it's going to accelerate. We're shifting from Homo sapiens to techno sapiens. What I mean by that is always connected. If you look at emerging research coming out across all demographics, all generations, we spend so much of our day on screen, on email. I don't think that's necessarily healthy, but that's what's happening. And that creates new challenges, new opportunities, new risks, new guardrails that we need to be aware of as leaders of ourselves, leaders of our families, leaders of organizations.
Okay. Getting to the upside of disruption, when you speak to business leaders and they're saying, hey, Terence, I know I have to be in AI, we're dabbling with it. What's the first thing you tell them or they need to be aware of?
I think it's to take an iterative approach. And to take inspiration from the ancient Stoics, start before you're ready. If you wait for 100% certainty, it's too late. Just in the next 5 years, AI will probably be 100 to 1,000 times faster, better, cheaper than it is today. Just imagine that for a few moments. Imagine that today is the slowest AI will ever be. When you think of it that way, it's either terrifying or exciting, depending on your personality type. But more than that, it's a call to action, a call to reflection. And so taking that iterative and experimental approach and involving others, because there's a lot of anxiety, anticipatory anxiety, uncertainty. So get started. Hands up if we've experimented with Claude or GPT or Gemini or any of these tools, these general purpose technologies. That's the first step. Start before you're ready.
I love this analogy because it's from our very beginning of our conversation. I think you quoted the Greeks and then you just cited the Stoics. So in other words, we as humans, as Homo sapiens, now techno sapiens, we've been doing this for a while. Am I correct, Terence?
Exactly. If you look at economic history, one of my favorite economists is Carlota Perez, British Venezuelan economic historian. We need to take a 1,000-year horizon. If you think just 100,000 years ago, we harnessed fire, a general purpose technology. 175 years ago, these big innovation platforms, electricity, automobile, telephone, that reshaped how we work, how we create value. And today we stand at this new inflection point: blockchain, automation, DNA sequencing, AI, all converging together, creating what's called additionality and exponentiality, where our only limit is our imagination. So these general purpose technologies are a history of humanity.
Okay. Now, we do know that automation, AI, will cure us of, quote, doing mundane tasks. Now, the big challenge is generative generative AI. Where is that going, Terence? So
I had an interesting, I spoke recently at Google, and obviously Google, alongside some of the other big mega cap tech companies, are really at the forefront, pioneering growth through AI. And I loved what you said there about generative, because when used in the right way as almost like a thought partner, a co-strategist, a co-creator, sparring with AI, it has the potential to generate new possibilities. For example, using AI intelligently, we create what's called ROI, which is not just return on investment, but a new human metric for a post-AI world: return on intelligence. Imagine that. You're in an organization and you're spending less than 30% of your time on bureaucratic work and 70% of time on intelligent work. Right now, the ratio is the opposite. Research shows that most people are spending 70% of their week on bureaucratic outcomes at the expense of intelligent work that actually creates meaning and work that's creative and innovative. So this is the hope, and this is the promise and the peril of AI. The story's still being written. The worst thing we can do right now is just become more automated or use AI just to cut costs. I think we need to use it as a tool to be generative and to achieve return on intelligence and return on imagination.
Now, I'm going to challenge you a bit here on generative AI, because it is displacing knowledge workers. For example, graphic designers, copywriters, things like that. So how can we use it to enhance things? Or what if I have been displaced? What should I be thinking? If I have been displaced by generative AI, how can I get back in my workspace or do something different? What's your perspective, Terence?
I think one of the best antidotes for this new age of exponential change that we're in is to be a lifelong learner. And that means learning, relearning, unlearning. That's one of the best things we can do right now. And the reality is, and we've seen reports coming out of the IMF, World Economic Forum, McKinsey, a lot of it's quite evangelical, by the way, as well, in terms of technology, some big numbers set out there. And actually, there is an alternative narrative going on right now. For example, there's $100 billion worth of sort of economic value that has not been disrupted yet by AI. I'm talking about traditional industries such as logistics, transport, manufacturing. So there are many industries that have many barriers to being disrupted by AI, but at a personal level, if it does happen, the key is renewal. The key is, as I said at the beginning, this idea of retraining, reskilling. A question to think about would be, what's my reskilling strategy? One of the best ways to outpace these forces of disruption, positive or negative, is to be reskilling before you need to. And that will mean that you're on the front foot rather than the back foot.
I always remember this. I did not tell you, but I lived in the UK in the mid-70s, and that was a time of labor unrest, certainly, of course. And there was this, I remember a gentleman I was working with at the time said, we were talking about displacement, automation or something. He goes, well, what about the roof thatchers? So, which was the idea of, not the idea, but the concept of actually thatching roofs. Well, they've still survived because we still have thatched roofs. In other words, we may do things differently. Things
are going to transform. Some things are going to be created. Some things are going to change in a different way. And there'll be new. We're seeing new jobs as well, new job titles, often outpacing the speed of change. So, one of my kind of call to reflections is, don't limit our challenges, challenge our limits. If we think about the last 200 years of economic history, we've been working like machines. And so this is, if we put a positive spin on AI for a moment, it is an opportunity to rethink and reimagine work, the workforce, and the workplace. But there are conflicting narratives out there, and the future's still being written.
Okay. Now I'm going to throw another curveball at you, getting to the generative AI. have you had experience or have you had discussions with people in the educational sector, university level, about how we teach our students to continue to be creative, or are they really doing their homework, or is ChatGPT doing it? What kinds of discussions are you hearing from in that end, Terence?
I got invited to speak at a company called Turnitin, and they're a software company that actually provides software to universities and business schools in North America, around the world actually, to spot plagiarism or cheating. And obviously, with the advent of AI and with the advent of ChatGPT, etc., this is becoming a real problem. So that's problem one. Problem number two is many business schools, many universities basically have a policy of you can't use AI, which to me seems very short term. I think that's a risky strategy. I think a wiser strategy, a more sustainable strategy, a more empowering strategy is to educate people, to give people the mindsets, the tools, to be able to understand how to use AI to augment what they do, and understand the difference between using AI for automation of those low value, routine, soul sucking tasks, and using AI to actually be more generative. For example, generating new possibilities or putting in different reports into language learning models and getting those language learning models to give different perspectives, using it as a sparring thought partner to challenge or to give you different voices. For example, if you've got a presentation coming up at the board, you could ask the co-pilot to say, okay, now I want you to be the CEO. What types of questions would the CEO be asking based on this presentation? What would be the objections from the CFO? So you can actually play out scenarios before they happen. That is a smart way to use this tool and a way to be more intelligent, not just bureaucratic.
Right. That's a powerful thing. And I know a colleague of mine, Greg Williams, who's a negotiation and body language expert, talks about using AI just for the reason that you said, gaming things out and,
Yes.
strategizing and stuff. So
exactly.
What kinds of conversations should leaders be having with their workforce about AI?
Questions are the answer in this age of AI. And as I said right at the beginning, to avoid artificial idiocy, what questions do we need to be remembered for? What questions are not being asked that should be asked in terms of AI? What's not being said that should be said? Here are some questions to get started. For example, how do we harness AI in a way that aligns with humanity, aligns with our employees on the inside, our teams on the inside, and our stakeholders on the outside? How do we align AI to be true to our values? Transparency, because what we want are three things: truth, transparency, and trust. And one of the risks of AI, and the narrative is still being played out, but for example, in 5 or 10 years, we could have higher concentration of AI power in the hands of a few companies. So moving from a multipolar world to a technopolar world. But also we can have disinformation or misinformation on steroids. We're already seeing that happen. And so I think talking about the risks of AI, getting people to experiment with AI with an iterative way, in an inclusive way, helps to reduce the anxiety about the future, but also equip folks with the tools and the mindsets and the culture sets to be able to put this tool to use. It's meant to be a tool. So I think starting a conversation, should be an ongoing conversation around what is our view, what is our AI strategy, how should we be harnessing AI, what sorts of experiments or use cases are we creating, and involving our people.
And I think you had said something that about generative AI that I've heard from experts such as yourself is to try it, get involved in it, because it's regardless of what you think about it, it's here. So you need to get into the pool, if you will, and use it. And I think you just intimated that once you get into it, it will dissipate elements of fear. Am I correct in that, Terence?
Exactly. I think it's like anything. As soon as you start experimenting with it firsthand, you remove the anticipatory anxiety. Another great question for folks to think about is this warm AI or cold AI? What I mean by that is most AI right now is cold AI. It's efficiency driven, it's optimization, it's about doing more with less. We know that's important, but that's not a route to human well-being. And it has a ceiling. Every company can be more efficient. Warm AI is the opposite. Warm AI is humanity first. For example, I met a company in Norway called No Isolation. They're warm AI. They've created a tool to help children recovering from serious accidents to stay connected to other kids at school with a robot avatar that goes to school on their behalf, and they can interact with the teachers in the school while they're at home. That's warm AI. Most AI right now is cold AI. And cold AI complicates rather than simplifies. Warm AI facilitates and enables. So ask yourself the question, are we creating warm AI, humanity first, elevates what makes us more human maximization, or cold AI, just profit maximization, and we forget about the human side?
Great. Well, that's a perfect lead in. We are racing toward the end of our show. We could keep on going, or I could for an hour.
Me
so
too.
But I know you have things to do. But it leads up, when you talk of warm AI, the concept of, I ask every guest a story about grace. Terence, do you have a story about grace you can share with us?
I do, and thank you, John. One of my stories of grace is I had the opportunity to meet a 100-year-old lady. It was very humbling, and she's a lady who loves to learn. She's a learner, not a knower. At the age of 83, she had a family meeting, and she told the family she wanted to study mathematics at university. She'd never had the chance to go to university because she was born in 1924, and the odds were stacked against a woman in 1924. Spanish flu, after the First World War, the Great Depression. But where there's disruption, there's opportunity. In the 1920s, we also had penicillin, medicine, the car. And so she had to wait until she was 83, and she applied to university, and she was very anxious when she got accepted. When she graduated, she was twice as old as the professor. And you would think this would be the end of the story. She showed me a photograph, twice as old as the professor. After that, she kind of unlocked this passion for learning. So she did a master's. At the age of 100, she did a parachute jump, which she did twice. And when I interviewed her for my latest book, I said to her, "What's your secret?" And she paraphrased Dan Pink. She said, "In life, the regret of inaction outnumbers the regret of action." And the number one regret when we're 100 years old or 90 years old is a lack of courage, a lack of boldness. For me, that was my reconnection, that we're drowning in data, we're drowning in noise, we're drowning in distraction. And we need to be fully present. We need to reconnect with ourselves and reconnect with our families, reconnect with our friends, reconnect with our colleagues. If we're lucky, we get to live for 960 months. It's just 80 years of age. My goal here, John, is not to depress everybody. It's never been easier to waste time. So that was my grace, to remind myself to enjoy the journey, but also to be fully present, to practice mindfulness, and to show care to those who you love. Care is the currency, is the ultimate currency.
Care is the ultimate currency. What a beautiful phrase. And that reinforces the whole notion of grace. And what I have enjoyed speaking to you, Terence Mauri, today is because while you are a technologist or a futurist and you work in the fringes of AI, and I don't mean pessimistically, but challenging frontiers, as you just brought it all back, the historical perspective from the Greeks to here, but also the caring is our currency, it's the human warmth, the warmth. And that's who we are. So, Terence, how can we find the book, and then how can we find you?
Thank you, John. So my new book, The Upside of Disruption, is coming out. It's coming out tomorrow, actually. So it's publication day tomorrow, and people can stay connected with me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's a great community, as you know, of thinkers and doers and curiosity seekers. So LinkedIn, but also my website, terencemauri.com. And it's been a joy to have this conversation with you today. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Terence. And with that, we will go out.